Welcome to It's Bloody Complicated, the Compass podcast. I'm Neil Lawson, your host and director of Compass. Joining me to help manage the questions is Grace Barnett from the Compass office. Hello, Grace.
Hello.
These are unprecedented times, and we need to rise to the new and enormous challenges we now face. Over the next few weeks, we'll be speaking with writers, thinkers, politicians, journalists, and public service workers about how we come out of this mess in much better shape than we went in, a good society after COVID-19. These conversations have live access for Compass members who can put their own questions directly to our guests. If you'd like to participate in a live call and help support all of our work, go to compassonline.org.uk/podcast to join Compass today. Otherwise, sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's podcast. The virus impacts on everyone, but it impacts on them differently. Joining us this week to discuss the crisis and how we build back better from it is Sue Goss. Sue has been bound up with Compass politics from the word go, as a member, as an associate, serving on the old management committee, and now as co-chair of the council. She has spent a life thinking about public services and place-based reforms. She's worked for the Labour Party, was chair of something called the Labour Coordinating Committee, which we'll hear about more from Sue. And she was also chair of the Charter 88 Council. She knows where all the bodies, all the ideas are buried. More recently, she's been a prolific writer and thinker for Compass, and we'll come on to more of that. The format, as ever, will be I'll ask our guest a few questions and open it up to you, Compass members on the call, for questions and comments before we finish on the hour. So, Sue Goss, welcome to the call tonight. Tell us where you are and how you are.
I'm in Kent. I'm in the High Weald. I'm great. I'm spending a lot of time in my lovely garden. It's just a shame so few people can see it.
No, you were going to take us on a tour, but you said it was raining.
Yeah, that's right.
which is a shame.
Which is good though. It's good for the garden, right?
Yes, I'm sure it is. Our usual way into this is tell us about your political life, but we've set you a sort of higher bar because we expect more from you. And the higher bar is because you've been so inextricably linked to Compass and were in my vernacular Compass before Compass existed. Kind of try and weave together the story of Compass about where it came from because it's so in your life and your political life. So talk us through that.
So I guess as a teenager, I was involved in anti-apartheid and stuff where you could do stunts and agitprop and theatre and community politics. Went to Sussex and got involved in student politics. Moved from there to South East London, got a job with a homelessness charity. And I think in the 70s, you know, those of us in community politics were a bit sort of contemptuous of party politics. And then Mrs. Thatcher swept to power and it became important to think about government and what governments could do, both in terms of good and harm. So I joined the Labour Party. And I just remember my first meeting was in somebody's front room with 6 old ladies and 1 old gentleman who'd been there for donkey's years and hadn't changed anything for 30 years. And I was part of a movement that swept in. Neil, you were too, I think, in 79. Ken Livingstone was getting organised at the GLC. Feminism and anti-racism and disability rights were being brought into the party for the first time. And we felt like we were waking the Labour Party up. I became a councillor in Southwark in 1982, chaired the first Women's Committee. And then that's when I got involved with the Labour Coordinating Committee with the glorious Paul Thompson, who I still think is one of the greatest thinkers of my lifetime, and started to create the soft left, the idea of there being a soft left, which, you know, wasn't as aggressive without the sort of clinical Marxist newspeak that the hard left had seemed to have, but with a radicalism that embraced things like feminism and anti-racism and gay rights and trying to think about how humans would thrive rather than just about the economy.
So just unpack that for people, because the Labour Coordinating Committee was a kind of a big foundational step on the road to Compass, wasn't it?
It was, and we were trying to create a sort of left politics that had a humanism to it. I mean, Robin Cook, for me, embodied the LCC. He was my hero. I still miss him. But that capacity to think deeply about history and about politics and about, the structural changes, but without losing humor, love, kindness, poetry, and a sense of how life could be better.
And Robin was, egalitarian, democratic and green, and he got all of it, didn't he? He got the connections between all of it, didn't he?
And he opposed the Iraq War.
Yes, yeah. I helped him. One of my little claims to fame is helping him write his resignation speech.
Oh, well done.
Yeah. So, yeah. And then, you've been involved in Charter 88 and the democracy movement. Tell us,
So then, in 1997, there was a Labour government, everybody got excited, but Charter 88 was trying to create the context for real democratic revolution. And as Anthony Barnett was saying a week or so ago, we got like 2 bits of it and the rest of it got junked. So decentralisation, devolution of power to Wales and Scotland was really important, but we needed the whole democratic revolution to happen at once, and it didn't. And then the Labour government became timorous and wouldn't do anything that could be done with that huge majority, somehow always afraid of losing, such that it wouldn't move. So you and I and lots of other people were very frustrated. So we made that statement, the Compass statement, which was 2003, I think, where we sort of said, we want better than this, it could be better than this, and tried to lay out what a good society would be like. And looking back at it, actually, the things that we're saying now are very close to the things we were saying then. The language has changed, but that idea of a good society in which equality is important because it's how you thrive, not instead of thriving. That was an important moment, and Compass came to that. There was also the magazine, the journal renewal, which I think bridged the gap for me. Paul Thompson, I were involved in that. That's been a really important journal over those years too.
And it's still thriving. It's still there. Jack, I don't know if you could put in the chat box, both if you could find a link to the original Compass statement that we published, because it does kind of stand the test of time, and also to renewal as well, which from the Lawrence and Wishart site or wherever they are, because that's still doing things, which is great. And then just run us through the sort of the years of Compass in your engagement. How you see it, how we've developed.
Well, we started off inside the Labour Party. We started off as another incarnation, didn't we, of the soft left in the Labour Party. But we started to have conversations with the Greens and the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish Nationalist Party and Plaid Cymru and loads of people who weren't involved in politics at all, and thought, hang on a minute, we agree with all these people. We agree with them a lot more sometimes than we agree with some of our comrades in the Labour Party. And it took a big shift. I can remember how big a day it was when we did decide to stop being a Labour Party organisation and become something that brought together people from left of centre political movements and tried to create a movement for social democracy that went beyond a particular political party. There are still people who don't agree with it now. I think it was a brilliant move. I think our colleagues from the Greens and from the Liberal Democrats and the other political parties, as well as the people from no party, have really enhanced Compass and its thinking. So that was a major shift, I think. And I still think the Progressive Alliance is a really important element of Compass's work. And I still believe that if we could bring together the left of centre political parties through networking, through conversations, through working together to create a sort of settled consensus about how change should be done and what it is that we need to do together, we would transform party politics. And that's still part of my aim.
Yeah, and it's definitely part of our aim as well. The world's moved on, quite a lot since even since we started 17 years ago. Climate is now there. We've obviously got Brexit. We've now got pandemics. We've got this ability to talk amongst each other and to each other across geographies and space and whatever else. I mean, but formal politics and the Labour Party itself feels quite stuck in in an old world. I mean, is it the primary big tent to do change in the 21st century, and how are we now approaching that question of shifting the paradigm in the 21st century?
So for me, and I guess for probably most of us in this call, climate change and the destruction of the planet is the most important, the only most important issue that we have to work on. I was saying to a friend of mine the other day, that for the humans can sort themselves out later, but for the insects and the animals, this is their last chance. We've got to. But I also think if we were able to tackle climate change, it would teach us how to tackle everything else. It would teach us all the things that we need to know in order to be able to solve the other problems that feel insoluble. So for me, that's the big thing. And whatever it takes, and whatever the alliances are, whoever it needs to be, however we need to do it, I think that's really important. But also because, and COVID-19 comes into this too, I think it links to coming back to life being meaningful instead of just something you struggle through, in order to earn enough money not to starve. There's something about a meaningful life being purposeful and having deep connections to our surroundings, our planet, our animals, our food. It's about alliance, it's about fellowship, and those things have sort of been degraded for such a long time that the struggle for a different way of thinking about the planet is also a different way of thinking about ourselves and each other, and those things come together. And you're right, the last place where you find any of that is in Westminster. But they're going to have to learn too. Part of the project is going to have to be to help them. My sense about where we are now is that the work is not to persuade. It's not that we have to persuade the majority of people that the current system is unfair and unequal and brittle and unsafe and unpleasant. The work is to convince people that there's an alternative. It seems to me the biggest failure of the 20th century was the failure of the socialist experiments and the creation of controlling state systems, which meant that for millions of working people, any sort of capitalism was better. How on earth did that terrible thing happen? And for most ordinary people that I meet, that fear of a totalitarian socialism is still there. So we have to create what's so sad is that in the UK, and as in lots of other countries, there was in the 19th century a huge alternative. There were cooperative associations, there was women's cooperative guilds, there were a network of working class led organizations able to intervene in the economy, able to manufacture, able to do retail, and the sort of state led model of socialism sort of mowed it all down. And then we watched what happened in Eastern Europe and in other countries. So I think the work is to make an alternative that we want to live in.
And I think we're coming out of that century of the centre, that century of the command and control, and I think technology is a big part in that. And I think you're absolutely right that our view of the good society, a life of meaning, of purpose, of creativity, of love and whatever is essential. But what you've been concentrating on, and I want you to talk about in particular the Open Tribe book, is not just the what, but the how. because that's central to our politics. Tell us a bit about the Open Tribe book. And again, Jack, if we could find a link to the Open Tribe book, which is on the Lawrence and Wishart site, so people can access that. Tell us a bit about that book, because it's been essential to our thinking.
So Open Tribe came from a Compass event in which we were slagging off tribalism, and there was a guy in the audience who said, hang on a minute, tribalism is what gets us up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go and leaflet an entire block of flats in the winter. You know, it's solidarity, it's what keeps us going. We had a really rich conversation about that and about the value of solidarity, and it felt like there needed to be a way of balancing the sense of belonging and solidarity and identity that comes from tribalism with the equivalent human endeavor to explore and adventure and find out and learn and be curious. And I didn't know how to do that. So I thought, well, if I don't know how to do this, then I need to pursue an inquiry, don't I? I need to be curious. So I chose, not at random, but 20 people from different walks of life, politicians, community activists from different countries, different backgrounds, and just had a conversation with them. And we put some up on the Compass website at the time about how you might get this balance to work. What is it that we would do? And I learned a huge amount in that endeavor. It reinforced my view that inquiry is a form of politics that is capable of making change. A number of those people have gone on to do fantastic things in the meantime. I thought they probably would. I learned that identity and belonging don't need to be sacrificed in order to be open and curious and welcoming. That there's an important political process of becoming where our point of arrival is different from our point of departure, but they still both continue to exist. And we tend to feel the need to choose all the time. What it takes, and what I gained from those interviews and hopefully Compass has always put into practice, is real mutual reciprocal respect and a dialogic conversation in which we don't have to agree, but we learn a huge amount about each other and about ourselves because of the nature of the conversation. And I still think that's how change happens. And we need a politics and institutions that don't fix us into a single opinion and identity, but allow that becoming to be part of the way we live our lives. There was a lot I learned about the state. Hilary Cotton was one of the people I interviewed, and I know she's a Compass friend as well. And there's a chapter in there called "Can the State Love?" And I've always, I've always been proud of that title, because a lot of what has happened to the way we run the NHS and social care and unemployment benefit and a whole load of public services has meant that they create a sort of chilling, clinical, scary relationship between state officials, however well-meaning, and people who turn to the state for help. And could you create a role for the state which would promote dignity and respect and openness and love? And that's what sent me on the route to writing Garden Mind, I guess, because it takes it on a stage.
It does. Let's come on to that. And just to people on the call, I'll ask a couple more questions, then it's over to you. So start loading any questions you've got into the chat thing. If you don't, I'm more than happy to keep asking Sue questions all night, because this is just brilliant. And you just remind me of one of those eternal kind of dilemmas for us, is that question of how do the nice people win? Because we're, in the sort of hippie tree-hugging kind of way that you've just described, we want to embrace people, we want to embrace ideas, we want to know what they think, we want to talk to them, we want to sit down, we don't want to destroy them, we don't want to beat them, we want to learn from them and with them. I mean, are we going to win? Or is, in Paul Thompson, who you cited earlier, famously said we might be the soft left, but we're not that soft. How do we win power by being nice? Are we going to win, Sue, or are we just going to have nice conversations?
Well, that has always been, one of the key questions, isn't it? You know, if the bad guys lie and cheat and use weapons and the good guys don't, how come, you know, they'll always win, won't they? And I struggle with this. I think in the end, you know, what Leninism taught us is if you use the weapons of the bad guys, you become the bad guys. So it's no use. You can't do it that way. The answer has to be that there have to be a lot more of us than there are of them. There has to just be millions. You know, millions of people can create democratic revolutions. We've seen it happen in Eastern Europe. You know, states cannot dominate against the will of the people. What I think the work has to go into creating a settled will of the people, and that will be enough if it's resilient and strong and self-supportive. What won't be enough is passing a piece of legislation, you know, and hoping for the best. You know, we need to change the way we all think in order for there to be enough of us to hold fast to get it to happen. But, you know, yeah, that there aren't any other ways.
That sounds like a good way. So take us into Garden Mind. This is obviously everything's a development of everything, and this is a development of Open Tribe, and it's development of 45 Degrees. But you've applied your own experiences of becoming a gardener over the last 20 years or something, and applied that to your practice of public service change. Talk us through Garden Mind.
Well, I mean, it began because I, like lots of other people, I guess, started reading about alternative philosophies and ancient ways of thinking and indigenous peoples' philosophies that connect us differently to the planet and the animals and plants and stuff around us. And I was thinking, well, in Britain, we haven't got rainforest and we haven't got tundra, but what we have got, the experience that connects and resonates for us is gardening. And I suppose I'm always looking for a narrative, a way of creating a description of something that will resonate, because most political language just switches people off and sounds meaningless. So the phrase from machine mind to garden mind felt like something that might hold a bit of heft. And in the paper, I trace how 19th century capitalism fell in love with the machine. And, you know, mass production treated human beings as moving parts in a machine. And that machine thinking started to crush everything else of value in our lives. I mean, you read Dickens, you know, the Gradgrinds of the 1850s and the 1860s, and the way that the humanity of people's lives was being crushed into those terrible working conditions in the 19th century. And the machines got slightly more civilized, but by the 20th century, that had sort of dominated everyone's thinking. And when we created the welfare state, it was created at a time of mass industrial production, and the idea of the factory got carried into the idea of the benefit system, the idea of the hospital, the idea of the prison, the idea of the lunatic asylum. You know, that machine thinking started to shape the way that we created all our institutions. And then, you know, post Thatcher, the sort of corporate mentality, the sort of the age of the management consultant started to bring in efficiency into public services. You get time and motion studies, you get the hunt for efficiency, you get performance management, and all of that is sort of reducing the human and inserting the machine. And I mean, universal credit for me is like the ultimate final terrible incarnation of the computer says no. So what we've done is created a governance system which is machine-minded, and it centralizes power, it centralizes control, and it specializes so that everything is very, very complicated. And what you see with the COVID-19 pandemic is just that system is so brittle when faced with something extraordinary that we don't know how to do with. I mean, you know, the horror of concentrating power right at the center where they are the very people who don't know what to do. You know, the people who do know what to do are left out of the decision making. So garden mind for me is just it's a metaphor, it's a way of thinking, but it's just a way of thinking how do organisms respond as opposed to how do machines respond. And organisms respond with redundancy. You know, they throw out lots and lots of different ways of doing things. It's a trial and error sort of world in which natural life finds its own way through experimenting. And distributed power rather than centralized power would give us a possibility of creating a world of experiment rather than a world of a single top-down blueprint designed like a car manual. So I suppose if you extend that metaphor, you know, what gardeners do is that they watch and they observe and they learn about the conditions they're trying to work within. They watch what the plants do and find the animals that insects that automatically help to create an equilibrium, and they create a soil that is rich enough to allow things to grow rather than trying to fix each individual plant. And that, if you extend that sort of metaphor, you start to see the state as tending to society rather than controlling it, and watching and learning and protecting the things that need extra help, and creating, you know, for me, a rich soil is things like basic income and permanent education and opportunities to thrive. What would our equivalent of a rich soil that enabled all citizens in all circumstances to be able to cope and thrive? And coming back to the, you know, how do the, you know, I mean, it is a metaphor, so, you know, you can extend this too far. But, you know, gardeners do have to stop thuggish weeds, and you do have to intervene to stop, you know, greed taking over. So it isn't simply softness, it's also resolute action when the balance is imperiled, but it's to prevent imbalance rather than for any other reason. And it moves you towards a long-term future of equilibrium rather than just trying to fix the problem by growing our way out of it. And I don't know what equilibrium will be like, and I can see that for lots of people that feels scary, but I think that's where we need to go. And that's how gardens are, you know, they balance, you know, things have an upside and a downside, and they go in cycles, and we need to start to learn to think like that.
And the big picture for me out of that, before we hand over to Grace and the members, is that, you know, the connection between the climate crisis and that method of change are so obviously interlinked, aren't they? We're talking about an ecosystem way of making change happen within an ecosystem that we're destroying because of our actions. And so therefore, if we think and behave like gardeners, have we got a better chance of, you know, saving the planet or not destroying the planet?
Well, I mean, two things. One is, organisms are clearly much cleverer than machines. So, you know, the idea that you simply make a machine to fix it, as opposed to learning how organisms adapt and change. And modern science is, you know, eco-science is teaching us all sorts of really interesting things that happen in the natural world that we didn't, you know, we thought that you could just, you know, take soil and pour chemicals into it and kill off the bad things and raise the good things and it'd be fine. And it turns out we've destroyed the soil because we didn't know what was in there. We didn't understand it. We were too stupid to know that all these little balancing systems were holding it all together. And now we're going to have to back off and let it recreate itself. So let's apply that thinking to everything we do. You know, governments can't do things by simply announcing a program and chucking in a few initiatives in. But if local government, regional government, local communities have got space to move and resources to act, and they are experimenting, then the small resources of the centre can, you know, can help and tend and change it. But so for me, the single big thing that would make the biggest change would be to decentralise power and resource, it wouldn't all go right, but it couldn't go any worse.
Hello, this is Grace from the Compass office, interrupting for a moment. I'm lucky enough to come from a large and politically diverse family. We really did have the full political spectrum represented over Christmas dinner, but in spite of our differences, we still actually like each other. I've always known, because of this, that politics should be more about listening and learning from the people we disagree with than shouting at them and fighting with them. And of course, I've definitely known for a long time that it really is bloody complicated. So I was so happy that when one day I discovered Compass, quite by accident, through their brilliant work on the Progressive Alliance in the 2017 general election. Since then, it's been an absolute pleasure to once again be part of a political family where talking to people in different political parties, admitting that you alone don't have all the answers, is not just okay, but actively encouraged. So if you'd like to find out more about Compass, you can visit compassonline.org.uk. And now, back to the conversation.
Let's hand over to Grace and start getting some people, other people, into the rich diversity of this conversation. Thanks, Grace.
All right, Alison Hilton, you're up first.
Thank you, that was really, really interesting. I just wondered, you talked, Sue, about having millions of the good guys, if you like. Do you have a view on how that millions of people is grown, how we get to that point, particularly engaging with people beyond the party political machines?
Good question. I think we have to stop waiting for government to do it. I think we have to do it. And I think that my very good friend Myron Rogers has this phrase, the way that you get to the future shapes the future. So I think the way we get to where we want to be is to do it and have it be like that, and then connect it all up together. So for me, local experiments, neighbourhood experiments, global experiments, trying things, mutual aid groups, community organisations, Black Lives Matter, people doing things for themselves, brilliant local authorities connecting to their communities in new ways. All of these things are the thing that will make things different. And people's experience of being part of those movements and those moments enables them to learn and change. And we have far greater capacity as individuals, as citizens, than we give ourselves credit for, as we always find out when we try and organise something. And just building our confidence and our courage that we can make things. We can, I was a historian at one point, and in the late 19th century, the network of cooperative societies covered almost the entire country, covering retail, funeral parlours, manufacturing, providing, and that was, the state didn't do welfare until, virtually until after the Second World War. Welfare was done by the people for the people. And we've forgotten that. We could do it again. That's how we make the millions. We do it.
Brilliant. Okay, next question coming in from Kieran.
So my question picks up on what when you started about the viable alternatives. People, however bad the present is, people seem to think that lefties will make it worse.
Yeah.
That would be, even at the moment, I think however bad I think things are, I think the Tories are ahead on economic competence. There is something about, progressive, organic people. You can sort of see people sitting watching the telly thinking you might let them run a nursery, but not the international economy. And I don't necessarily agree with it, but how do we cut through that whole thing about actually we could run the country, we could run the international system, and there's this lack of belief, this kind of thinking is taken seriously by people, etc.
Yeah, no, I agree. 3 thoughts, I suppose. I don't know the answer. One is, we have run the country. People on the left have run the country lots of times. Secondly, what does running the country consist of? So, people on the left run local government, people on the centre left run Scotland, people, they run bits of Wales, they run neighbourhoods, you run things. So we are already running the country in a way. It's just that what we don't run is the economy, I guess, is the question. So I think we're trusted. I think people on the left are trusted to do everything except run the economy. I do think we have not bottomed out as a soft left, if soft still applies as a, what's the gardening equivalent? So it's a green, as a, I don't know, as a weedy left. We haven't bottomed out our approach to capitalism. And actually that's a bit tricky, because some of us think that we tame capitalism. Some of them think we can redesign it so it's different. Some people want to get rid of it. And I suspect that that's the really hard conversation that we're avoiding, is what do we do about capitalism? Because I do think people think, probably I think, state-run economies don't go well. So what's an alternative to a state-run economy and to capitalism? And what does that look like? And we haven't done that work properly. And I suppose the final thought is that the experiments that are underway, both here and in other countries, demonstrate a different and better way of doing things. It's just that each one is sort of in its own little bubble. And if we could connect them all together and demonstrate how they fit together, then we begin to have a model. But at the moment, we've just got bits. And I do think part of Compass's work is to fit all the bits together and say, look, if you connect everything together like this, it's a thing that works. And this is how it might work. And that's work. We haven't done that work. We haven't done that thinking work, but it's available for us to do it. Could we have different care for the elderly and different health systems and different sorts of working lives and different childcare and, all the things we know are working in different experiments? What would it look like if it all fitted together? I think that's quite exciting.
Okay, next question then from Alex Cooper.
I hear your aversion to a centralised systemic approach to politics, and you're more people-centred, organic, I think. But nevertheless, do you think there is a place for technology in moving forward to engage people in decision-making more? We've got endless discussion platforms where nothing's ever decided, but could we use technology to involve people more in the process of democracy? I know that Tom Watson and John Cruddas have alluded to wanting something like that in the past, and I just wonder whether that's come into your thinking at all.
Yes, I mean, I'm a technophobe, I have to admit. I like living in the 18th century, but I do believe that technology has the possibility to be used both for good and for not good, depending on how we grab it. I mean, this sort of call wouldn't have been possible without technology, and this is how we are learning to talk to each other. And we're not going to all, we can't all get on trains and go to a meeting for an hour, but we can do this. So I think that technology is giving us all sorts of new models of ways of doing things. I live in a country lane, and our lane's got a WhatsApp group, and the WhatsApp group runs the lane. 2 days ago, a dog got into the field with the sheep next door, and the WhatsApp group was able to track the dog, find the dog, catch the dog, call the farmer, and get it sorted. Well, that's, you couldn't have done that any other way. So I think technology has got to be a crucial part of this. It's just, don't come to me for the ideas, because I'm hopeless.
All right, thank you, Sue. Next up, we have Mary, who says she has a question which might be unpopular. So,
all right.
Hi. Well, my unpopular view is I'm not interested in climate change. I think lots of charities and organisations deal with that, but my interest is in man's inhumanity to man. And I don't see how political organisations, if they concentrate on the climate, are going to help every man in his day-to-day life, earning money, paying his rent, too high electricity. That might be linked to the climate, I must admit. And so I rather my heart rather sinks when you say the main thing you're interested in now is in climate change.
Well, so how would we connect these two things together? I mean, I guess for me, climate change is also about a better life and a good society. They're not separate, they're not different. So what is it that we would do to live together more successfully, doing less damage and having more of a sense of purpose? I mean, I think, see, for me, the idea of being a guardian of the planet and not a destroyer of it is about humans and how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about each other. And yes, we are going to have to create technologies that try and deal with fuel poverty and some of the, you know, so in order, once you say we can't grow our way out of trouble, then you start to have to focus on the fact that what we've got now is wildly unequal. You know, so this thing that we've been following for the last 50 years, which is that, you know, poor people haven't got enough, so let's just grow everything, and then rich people get twice as much more out of what we grow, and a few people get a little bit extra. If you start to say, well, no, we've probably got, you know, Kate Raworth's got this brilliant donut diagram where she sort of says there's a sort of there's an inner limit, which is what everybody needs to survive and live a decent, enjoyable life, and there's an outer limit, which is what the planet can handle, and we have to work within those two extremes. We can't simply bust through what the planet can handle. Then you have to face the fact that what there is wildly unequally distributed, and that's intolerable. And then you have to tackle that problem. But you have to tackle it differently, if you see it like that, than simply saying, well, we'll just grow our way out of trouble and we'll just, you know, allow capitalism to accumulate more and more and more of what there is, but we'll have a bit more for everybody. It'll have to be done differently. And that is a huge challenge. But I you know, I'm not saying that I know how to behave well in terms of the planet yet, and I'm not saying I do. But unless we change our priorities, I really fear for what life would be like for our children and our grandchildren.
Okay. Right. Next question then from Colin Miller.
Hi, Sue. Good to see you. We've often talked about the stuff about creating a deeper democracy, a more organic, participative democracy. But I think it's always very abstract, those ideas. And I'm just curious to know how you would see a deeper, more participative and deliberative democracy functioning in practice. That's a tough question, I know. But I don't think that's the sort of stuff we need to talk about, that kind of vision a lot more, I think.
Yes, and I remember Jeremy Gilbert saying, you know, that, you know, in his good society, we spend most of our lives in meetings and thinking, oh shit, do we have to? There's a sort of sense in which, you know, that's one of the things the people fear, isn't it? Is that, you know, the left will make them spend their lives in meetings, and I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's going. We don't want to spend our lives in meetings. So partly that's because the meetings are so ghastly. So, you know, we could make meetings more entertaining, but I still don't think that's how we make democracy work. I think so. Partly, I think we don't want to sit in meetings making abstract decisions. We want to be able to do what we want to be able to do. So I think a lot of self-organizing for me is about doing the work that makes the world better, not sitting talking about it for someone else to do it. So for me, I'm much more interested in community, in the state, local and national, putting its resource behind communities self-organizing and doing the stuff that they want to do, than I am running lots and lots of democratic process in which we all tell the state how they should, you know. I think we should have less stuff that is run through the democratic process and implemented by the state, and more stuff that is us running our own lives collaboratively with state resource and help to help us. So it moves democracy away from just being decision making about what someone else should do into taking control of the action and the activity. Now that has the same, oh God, I've got to spend my whole life, running football clubs and organising things. But if people choose the things that they enjoy to be involved in running, it may be that is a pleasurable experience. And then I think we need to change how democracy works. I think if democracy were an inquiry, was a learning process, it ought to be fun. It ought to be exciting. If democracy was bringing together people with different views in a way that wasn't hostile and wasn't aggressive, but was penetrating and exploring hard, that learning process ought to be part of how we as humans grow. But we don't do that. We've designed a way of doing democracy which is tedious and boring and pointless and point scoring, and the media have got a lot to answer for, but so have the political parties and the way we do politics. So and then the bit I don't know how to deal with is how to stop angry people, because I think people are allowed to be angry. It's reasonable to be angry, but how do we stop that anger getting in the way of a proper inquiry? What would that be like? How would we make it okay for people to express their feelings, but then to be able to be part of something deeper and more meaningful? So we're baby steps, but we do it in Compass. So if we can do it in Compass, I don't see why we can't do it everywhere else. We just have to think of how.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Okay, moving on to Sally Thorpe had a question.
Obviously, we've got a very right-wing government, and I just wonder where you think we can go with this right-wing government. Is there any possibility of having a conversation with them so we could get some of these wonderful ideas going? Can we get a new consensus? At the moment, it feels like it's going away from us. I'd like your views, please.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's tough thinking about how we might work with the current government. So I think there's Wales to work with, there's Scotland to work with, there's, I don't know, possibly even Northern Ireland to work with, there's local government to work with, there's community organisations to work with, there's charities to work with, there's public sector organisations to work with, there's the people, so there's lots of places where there is some power to work with. The trickiest bit is going to be Westminster, and that's where I think we are a bit dependent on MPs of all political parties learning how to network and talk to each other in order to construct majorities that might not be the expected ones, but might do something strange and helpful and good. I think we have to help Labour politicians explore how things could be different, because I think that their lives are pretty, shuttered in, and they'd find it hard to imagine it being different to how it is, and so they get, very sort of narrowly focused. I think we need to do a lot of work to show them what it's like on the ground when things are different, and show them the experiments in Barking and Dagenham and Wigan and the places where things are being done differently. It's no point, and I said, there's a Buddhist thing where you have to send loving kindness to someone that you hate or you think is dreadful, and the idea of sending loving kindness to Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings is a struggle, isn't it? But there may be people on the fringes, good, people who are well-meaning people, that the political groupings can work with.
Okay, thank you, Sue. So last question I think we'll have time for should hopefully be slightly more straightforward one. Ginny Smith.
Yes, it is a fairly straightforward one, and this has been brilliant and very inspirational. But I'm wondering about our voting system, electoral system, and isn't the only way that our politics really can change from embedded tribalism to a much more open dialogue is by changing our first past the post voting system?
Yes, of course. I mean, I was very active in Charter 88, and that was one of the key demands. And I am a very strong supporter of PR. You're absolutely right. The problem is not saying that, because of course that's right, but getting it, because the British electorate have not felt that that is a really important thing to change. So my sense is probably goes the other way around. If we get a strong progressive majority for a better society, and we can begin to describe what that will be like, and we can show that you need PR to get it, then we might be able to shift the politicians. Why the Labour Party thinks that first past the post serves it, I have no idea, given the maths, but that's an argument we have to keep on having. But you're absolutely right, Ginny. Let's keep struggling for it.
Okay, thank you, Grace, and thank you for everyone for some great questions. I kind of wanted to intervene in so many points.
You've had better answers.
No, I would have had different answers soon. And I want a chapter in a book by you about, can we love a Tory? And I think, I go back to that kind of point where, the Conservatives kind of helped bring about the post-war settlement. And if we're going to have a post-COVID, post-climate settlement, we're going to clearly have to speak to a lot of people that we don't normally speak to.
Oh yes, Tories and this government are not the same thing necessarily.
I agree. So anyway, we'll finish where we always finish our podcasts. I want you to sort of rattle around your brain and your experiences in your life about where you find inspiration from, where do you find hope from, what keeps you going to think, to be active, and to try and build this good society. Tell us where hope comes from for Sue Goss.
Well, when I'm not doing this, I work as a coach and a facilitator and a team coach in local government and amongst community organisations and with the NHS, although COVID-19's put a stop to most of that. So I get my hope from the people that I meet who are on the ground, who are doing it. And I better not name names, but there's a brilliant woman in Islington who works for the council, was given a neighbourhood project to run, and she was bringing together GPs and nurses and social workers and housing officers and people from all sorts of different organisations and helping them create the space to come up with their own solutions, and then going into battle to get the high-ups to let them implement their solutions. And every time it was all impossible, we'd have a chat and she'd go back out again and have another go. And so there are people all over local government, in the community, who know how to do this stuff, and who are really creative and energized, and millions, probably hundreds of thousands anyway. And I just think, we need to just sort of, get the synaptic things to link them together. So I think I just get my hope when I see it in action. When we talked to Barking and Dagenham not very long ago, we were listening to how they were changing the way they thought and the way they acted as a council. I was in tears. I thought it was brilliant. That's where I get my hope from. That and the garden, of course, because my beetroots are going brilliantly. So good to hear. I don't like beetroots, but I wish you well. I wish you well with them. Look, that was a fantastic conversation. A real kind of rattle around the history and the genesis and the origins of Compass, but also our thinking. And you've been a huge part of our thinking. So thank you very much for all of that work over the decades, and for coming on tonight and being part of the conversation again. It's been a really thrilling kind of ride for an hour. Thank you for everyone for being part of it and making it possible. Thank you for the questions. Thank you, Grace and Jack, for supporting this. We're back next week. They say never meet your heroes, and I've kind of partly met him before. Peter Tatchell, the Green Party activist and human rights campaigner, who I have so much admiration for. Peter will take us for a whistle tour, stop tour around his life and his politics and what he's hoping for. So that will be another treat that I'm looking forward to next week. Until then, thank you again, Sue. Thank you, all of you. Keep safe, keep well, and as Sue has been saying, keep hopeful. Take care. So,
If you like what you've heard today and want to be part of a much more equal, democratic and sustainable future, a good society, then visit us at compassonline.org.uk/podcast and you'll be able to join us live on future calls just like this one. You can tweet me at Neil, Neal _compass, or Compass at Compass Office. And if you've enjoyed this week's episode, please give us a rating. It will help us reach more listeners in the future. And it's only fair that they know it's bloody complicated too.